So the next presentation we have will be on nurses and their patient deaths, the coping styles of nurses, and it's going to be by this lovely lady that I have sitting next to me, Sister Michelle Williams Sampson. So Michelle is a nurse teacher at the New Amsterdam School of Nursing at the University of Ghana. And she grew up in the country area of Almas Village, Region 6. After graduating from high school, she was a teacher for a year. Then she joined the registered nursing program at the University of Ghana and worked as a ward sister at various hospitals while attending the University of Ghana to pursue her Bachelor of Science degree and diploma in education. She is currently a full-time nursing tutor attached to the New Amsterdam School of Nursing and a part-time at the University of Ghana. As of September 2022, she marked 20 plus years of working in the nursing profession. We're so happy to have her here today with us and look forward to your presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone in the room, everyone on Zoom. My name is Meshel Williams Sampson, and the research that I am presenting today is a research that I would have done for my master's. This was done at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. And I would have looked at with my colleagues assisting me, nurses and their patients there. Everyone in the medical field, one time or the other, you always remember the first time your patient died. And it's something that lives with you. It's just that you learn to get past it. Right? So that is one of the reasons why I was driven to do this topic. Yes, so for persons that are here in Guyana and persons that are in other countries, we know where Guyana is, and Suriname and Venezuela and Pacific are neighbors. Right. Okay, sorry about that. Finding research for this topic was a bit tedious because you can't pull up no research that says, oh, if your patient died, what to do, how should you cope? So we had to look at different literatures that would coincide to this. One of the literature that was found was that anecdotal evidence suggests that compassion to other healthcare personnel, nurses are exposed to having more extended contact with patients. The reason why I would have focused on nurses is because I'm a nurse, and nurses on the whole are at the patient's bedside. Sometimes, along with doctors, we're here when they take their last breath. Often when the patient dies, you're left to cope alone. While other studies would have focused on how the quality of nurse or the quality of the patient can improve healthcare workers, and a few in this research examined how nurses' emotions and their reaction responded to patient death. Previous one? Yes. We're having some problems with share. The next slide. Or should I say next slide? Okay, that's it. Many studies found ways to improve and understand the roles of nursing in providing the best care and the attention needed for them to examine how coping should be done. But can we study how coping is done? Is there anything to measure emotions? There's nothing to measure emotions. And these research literatures looked at when that is unexpected, how the person behaved, and with this one research here, it showed that it can be concluded that grief is very common among nurses who experience patient death, and it's often ignored because as the healthcare personnel, you need to move on. You need to move on and continue with your job. Some authors have stated that nurses aim in providing quality care to patients and they have provided emotional support and compassion. Therefore, the grieving process or the grieving response of nurses who experience death may be included in some areas. You find that some nurses, they cry, some doctors cry, depending on the type of patient that they have. Many studies also found ways on improving and understanding the roles of the nurse in providing the best care of their patients. Next slide, please. Yes, in addition to the issues outlined above, life experiences and culture-related aspects can strongly influence the feelings and attitudes that healthcare personnel and nurses face when patients die. Culture is understood as the prearranged way of thinking and the behaviors that characterize one group from another. Such patterns are grounded in different factors of life, such as knowledge, beliefs, ethics, expressive rules, different customs, different behaviors, and this all allows society, community, and the members to function in this entire complex world. Until another research would have shown that anecdotal evidence revealed that emotional experience that nurses encounter is not an aspect that is taught in the nursing school. And I think in medical school as well. All is done is that you do the grieving process. That's it. You're not taught on how do you cope. And like I said, how do we teach how to cope? Coping with death of patient and to explore the potential influence of the culture aspect. This is something that's phenomenal. Next slide, please. One of the tools that was used in this research, in this kind, is the 5 content area exposed by cultural formation in diagnosis and cultural aspect. It's called the DSM-5 and corresponding to cultural factors related to psychosocial issues, environments, and the different levels in which it functions. In this item, it shows that social stressors, the availability of social support, disabilities, functions, cultural interpretation, and religion was a big part in this research. Religion, family background, culture, tradition. And all of this provided support in how persons would cope with stress. Next slide, please. Another research that we would have found is that it shows that stressors are something that is always there. But how to cope with it, that was not outlined in none of the research that we checked worldwide. Anecdotal evidence observed and revealed that emotional experiences that nurses will encounter is not an aspect that most nurses will teach. And the researchers decided to investigate the nursing coping strategies with death of their patients in Guyana and the potential influence and cultural aspects. Something, John? The statement of the problem: nurses are at the patient bedside when the patient dies. Daily, they're faced with these type of situations. And how can you get accustomed to this? Next slide, please. Guyana is a diverse population. We have different culture, ethnicity, group, religious beliefs. And here you can see 40% of the total population is Indo-Guyanese, 26, Afro-Guyanese, 11, Amerindians, 20% mixed group. And then we have the Chinese and the Caucasian and others, which is the 1%. The reason why we would have looked at these areas is because different culture would have looked at cultural belief and their practices. Considering these statements, research question how nurses from Guyana cope with their emotions and the experience that they stimulated by patients' death. Next slide, please. The objectives were, can you go back? Thank you. sorry, let me mouse. The objectives were to identify the prevalence of nurses who experience patient death in their career and to evaluate what coping strategies they would have used in these experiences. Next slide.
The one before.
You're having something. Yes, sorry about that. Now, another research that was looked at is a qualitative study that was conducted at the National Center for Biotechnology in the US, which looked at nurses at the hospital and understand how they experience patients' death. Participants report feeling of sadness, seeking control over grief, anger, denial, fear, guilt, feeling powerless. Researchers highlight the lack of training, help in managing grief, and the needs of policies that need to be implemented in these institutions. Some strategies suggest continuous education in order to bring awareness to the factors that affect nurses, healthcare personnel, and how they grieve. Development of organizational policies. What do they do? Do you go to a social worker? Can you be taken off the floor? When one patient dies, you have to move to the next patient. The world just doesn't stop. Another research would have looked at please next. Keep next in it. Yes, you can make it. Now, dealing with death can be both emotional and challenging. This review would have aimed at understanding the coping style dealing with patients' death. Several days from different findings and studies showed different key terms and outline that can be used on how to cope with death and dying. And what policy can we implement to support these persons or the healthcare personnel? Next slide, please. Yes. Next slide. Yes. Death of the patient, how it seems, is one of the most challenging experiences that are often encountered in the hospital. Nurses who are not competent in this area may not be able to adequately deal with these patients and their relatives when they die. Sometimes when it's the age of the patient, it has a more effect on you. If the person is a long-term cancer patient, but if it's a child as compared to an adult, it has a more impact on you. These factors were said to be what nurses would use as their strategy to help them cope with the death and the different resources that can be available. And one that we looked at is the extrinsic factor, which looked at culture, spiritual beliefs, tradition, teaching, and different education programs. And one of the most important things we're looking at is debriefing, debriefing sessions. Okay, so while we're dealing with the technical difficulties of going back, some of the nurses were, the research that was done was at the Amsterdam Hospital. And we had at that time 95 RNs. Can you please go back? Yeah, 95 RNs. And some persons refused, while some participated because persons are afraid that if they give their voice, they might be victimized and all of these things. This sampling there is done. We know that there are different shifts, so we have to be able to get to them with the different hours. And like I mentioned, 2 different questionnaires were used, which is a socio-demographic that we use the DSMI-5, and we used Lazarus coping strategies questionnaire. Can you just next? Next slide, please. That. Data collection was done using, as I mentioned before, the coping strategies by Lazarus and Folkman. And it looked at different aspects. It looked at how you cope, your emotion, it looked at religion and everything. And next slide, in this study, I had to write to Miss Susan Folkman and Lazarus to get their permission to use their questionnaire. And a scale was given on how to calculate the findings. The cultural aspect, like I mentioned before, was the SMS5, and the questions clarified influence on spirituality, religion, and more so tradition as it related to person dealing with stress. Next slide, please. In Guyana, there are many religions that we know. We have Christianity, Muslims, Hinduism, and others now, because we have Buddhism and all of that. Now, we are free to practice our own religion. And when an individual dies, the relatives are free to call their religious leaders at the last minute of their dying. And as healthcare personnel, we need to give them that last right. None of the hospitals have chapels. When we did research, we would have noticed other countries, they have chapels that you can go and you can pray. But comparing to Guyana, we don't have that. And it is understood that religious history is characterized differently because persons pray different. And thus religion was considered an important variable when it comes to analyzing the questions. Next slide, please. Now, we use the experiments CT test. That was one that was used. And to calculate and compare the means of these coping strategies. Next slide. We all know that emotions cannot be measured. So the K-Wallace was also used to identify the mean difference. We look at the coping style scoring. And they mentioned about Hinduism, Christianity. You will see this later on in the discussion part, how we would have gotten our evidence. Next slide, please. Going through this, like I mentioned, 85 participants, most were women. And we know in the nursing arena, we have more women than males. And 53% of the nurses were Christian, and they worship 42% once per week, meaning that these are able to go to church on Saturday or Sundays. The mean age was around 29.63 years, and the prevalence of death is 88. Some variables were there. According to Lazarus coping theory, you had different aspects like playing, full problem solving, self-control, positive reinforcement, seeking social support. So depending on how the candidates pull the questionnaires, that's how these information was given. Next slide, please. These are some of the information there with the different variables under control, coping, distancing, self-control, seeking social support, accepting responsibility, escaping, avoidance, and all of that. And we looked at the mean, and according to different variables, this will be discussed in the discussion aspect. Can I have the next one? Results, education level, patient's life stage, or nurse's department of work related to the patient death. We all know certain wards on the whole are gifted to have a patient death. If you work certain wards, you know it's a medical ward, it's a ward that's high incident, right? Influence of religion and coping adopted by nursing in this situation. How do they cope was looked at, and Hinduism presented the highest score relating to escape avoidance style than other professions. The frequency of religious practice at worship or at home does not seem to be influencing the coping styles adopted to deal with the patient's death. Next slide. Let's go back a bit for a minute. Thank you. In the discussion aspect, we look at cultural influence regarding the cultural aspect, identifying which religion was highest, which one was lowest, how often persons pray. Next line. Cultural influence was looked at, and one study was done on how patients would cope with death by nursing, finding that the problem that they experience is that when they know that the patient is dying, they don't want to be around. They prefer to swap shifts, swap wards. Some nurses that we found that they were tired. They were tired emotionally every day of someone dying, so they didn't want to work at those wards. And this article also indicated that nursing who care for themselves in the term of practicing coping strategies, they draw their strength from spiritual belief by praying at that time. Next slide, please. Similarities in different articles. Nurses share their adaptive strategies, what they would do in order to deal with what is happening. Some said that they hold on to their beliefs and they look at something that is greater in the afterlife. Some look at person's religious aspect, understanding the balance between compassion and being healthy emotional boundaries. Some person mentioned that people from all walks of life come to the hospital to seek care, and they bring along different cultural beliefs and practices, and they have to see how to heal and grieve with them. While some disbarred from just being emotionally attached. The study showed that nurses had adopted different coping strategies. Cultural aspects such as religion would have influenced these styles that were adapted. And the conclusion of this study would have looked, it was that based on this studies recommend that policymakers and managers put system in place dealing for healthcare persons and the whole to be counseled. And it highlighted what is happening to nurses after patient deaths, and much emphasis was placed on being important that they need counseling, they need some form of treatment session. And that is it for our presentation. Like I mentioned at the starting of the presentation for persons in the room and online, death is something that we know is inevitable. We can't run away from it. But as long as you're in the medical field, the first time your patient died, and I know all of you can remember, because it's something that lives with you. But every day dealing with it over and over, emotionally it affects you. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Meshel.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, question.
Just quickly, congratulations on doing that study, actually. Two things.
Yes.
As an organization psychologist, two things stood out to me. First of all, that how to cope with the event of your patient dying is not something that's taught within the nursing school. I think there needs to be some revisit to the curriculum locally. That's one.
Yes.
And secondly, I know it's in the space of corporate, so we have something called nothing again permanent as yet.
Yes.
But we have something called employee assistance program,
Yes.
where you can have this kind of support for your employees. And I believe the nurses are caregivers, and the caregivers needs to be cared for.
Yes.
So this is something that they should put in place because, and you mentioned something that you just can't pull a nurse off of the ward if they're being affected by the death of a patient. I find that sad because it depends on the level and how they're being affected. I believe there should be some room for some person to take a 5-10 minutes, be given a support until they can come back and work in another hour or so. So I think those are all conversations that needs to be had at the level of the policy level, and those who has the ability to implement to do so, because that level of support is needed.
Thank
Yes, one thing, first of all, congratulations on the study. Indeed, I think this was a very intriguing topic. Now, I was telling her that as a nurse, when a patient dies, you're not allowed to breathe. you are not allowed to grieve. First of all, in nursing school, they teach you that you do not get attached to the patient emotionally. Because if they die or when they're discharged, it would invoke all these emotions in them. But you, as a person, as an individual, you cannot tell me not to get attached to someone, because if I have a patient that's there with me on this ward for about a month, eventually I'm gonna get attached in some way. It might not be a deep attachment, but definitely I'm gonna get attached to this patient. Now, when this patient dies, you think I am a stone wall, I'm gonna just stand there and, oh, let me just call the family and wrap the body and send it to the morgue or what? No, I would have some sort of feelings, because remember, I am catering to the emotional as well as the physical needs of this patient as one here. So I think we need to revisit the curriculum as well. You can't teach people not to get attached to patients. And I was taught that in nursing school. I cannot get attached to people. And if that's one of the rules, I broke it several times. As an individual, it's hard to not get attached to someone you're caring for. We generally humans are nurturing. In addition to that, when a patient dies, you're not given the space to, show any form of emotion. Supervisors will tell you, please, this is why we teach you how don't get attached to the patient. Rub the corpse quick and let go. You cannot tell me that. I've seen nurses break down over the death of patients. Personally, I've not done it openly, but I would take myself away from the scene after the whole family come and share whatever. I would go into a corner, I'm allowed to feel, but if one of my superiors see me, it's an issue. And one experience that I think I'm still trying to get over is one of our colleagues became a patient and transported a patient to Georgetown and was involved in an accident and died. And I went into work that day and I've never seen some of my colleagues like that. Never. Nobody could work. I remember coming into the night shift and 50 minutes after I reported for duty, I couldn't even take over my unit. I had to go home. The emotions were overwhelming. You cannot at no point tell me I cannot grieve for a patient. I'm allowed to do that as an individual. So I think this study was very good. I wish you can share it with all the nursing school, especially in women, so that we could have something different, a shift in the thinking and the operation.
Anybody?
Thank you for that comment. Any other comments or questions yet?
Yeah, I endorse what Ernst said as well, as a social worker working in the health here also. What I'm thinking here, listening to this nurse, is that maybe there should be some kind of brief intervention when something like that occurs within the hospital setting. There should be a brief intervention. And we're listening to nurse here and I'm thinking, for just a 5 minutes or so, because everybody is human beings to deal with. And I can tell a difference in for me as a social worker, I have to stand there, look at it, and indeed don't really reveal how I feel about that patient as I'm working. And I would go in my office in my quiet time, and I would repeat how I felt at that time. I can do that, but the nurses, I'm understanding here now that with the nurses, you can't really do that. I think that is very satisfactory. So there needs to be some kind of intervention where you have maybe a brief minutes that they can pause and just regroup and you'll get back to it. That's my thought.
Excellent presentation. What I would like to see is how the grief process, the patient just died first time, how it transcends with your family, with some stories from all the persons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I came in very late. Very scared. But listening to the discussion and just listening to the last comments that you said was made, a couple of comments. One, I'm a medical doctor. And what we need to recognize is that the quickest ways in which you can get professional for training, there needs to be a paradigm shift.
Yes.
And everything is based on evidence. I don't know, and I've been in healthcare in Guyana for 30 odd years, right? I don't know if any study has been done like this before, but this should be presented to a policy maker. So this is the evidence that we have, that this is what obtained. We're dealing with human beings and a person breathe like anybody else. In 1991, when I saw my first patient with AIDS, beautiful young lady, 23 years old, sitting in front of me, with amnesia, severe weight loss and all of that, and looking to me as a doctor for answers, and I couldn't provide the answers, so that affects me. I had to develop a coping mechanism. What I'm getting to here is that this needs to be presented to policymakers. We talk about interventions. Interventions don't happen in a vacuum. It needs to be presented to the policymakers. This is what happens when we, the nurses, are faced, not just nurses, healthcare providers, but it doesn't happen for nurses. This is presented to them, and therefore let's work together so that we can get the best out of the nurses going down the road. Yeah, it's about mental health.